Hello and welcome to our session on governance and management of MFIs. Now, in general, for an MFI to perform well, it needs to have a certain governance framework as well as a management setup that ensures it. Because to a large extent, the performance of a microfinance institution is driven by the management and governance infrastructure. So for the purposes of this lesson, our learning objectives will be to explain the role of the board of directors, discuss how to design optimal incentive schemes for MFIs, identify various risks faced by MFIs, discuss the best way to manage and control operational risks, and identify the role of audit in risk management. Now let's look at the role of board of directors. In the normal sequence of things, we have a set of persons who provide funding for a business. Now, in the case of the MFIs, even depositors are included together with the shareholders. But because there's usually a separation of ownership and management, the shareholders appoint managers to take care of the business of the MFI. The board of directors is usually a superior body that is put in place to oversee, or more importantly, provide oversight function to ensure that management works in the best interest of shareholders and other stakeholders. So for the board of directors, their main job is to oversee management, and they focus on upholding the mission and vision of the organization and providing strategic guidance, ensuring the adequacy of resources, be they financial, leadership, and reputation, in the pursuit of the organization's goals and mission. They design and implement policies to achieve the institution's strategy and ensure that management is accountable. You can see CMF 2005. The board is also responsible for usually hiring and firing the CEO, so that they select the head of the institution and approve his or her compensation. And they support management in general and monitor performance. But there's one key thing: they govern but do not manage, meaning that they are not involved in the day-to-day operations of the MFI. They also ensure that there's effective organizational planning, including succession planning at both the board and executive levels. They ensure that human and financial resources are deployed appropriately in terms of effectiveness and efficiently. They also ensure that they identify the risk and make sure that the provider operates prudently. So in essence, they are the ones who formulate the risk appetite, meaning how far they can go and under what circumstances. So normally they also approve external audits and ensure proper internal controls, and generally the internal auditor reports to the board or the board's audit committee. Now, within the scope of managing an MFI, it is uncontested that one of the most valuable assets of any organization is a human resource component. So that's this human resource. So the human resource management function is responsible for recruiting, developing, and motivating people to accomplish the mission of the MFI. So there's a need to also have an organizational structure that provides or supports increased accessibility to clients and lower transaction costs and risk. The HR function is responsible for recruitment and screening. In that place, they ensure that they hire sufficient numbers of people with adequate skills, attitudes, and motivation. And the human resource function is also responsible for training and development, i.e., they ensure to update the skills of the workforce, reinforce the relevant institutional culture and values, and promote teamwork. In doing that, they have to ensure that they provide the right compensation schemes so as they're able to retain the right kind of human resource. So mainly it comes with the salaries and incentives that are meant to retain well-performing and experienced employees. They also ensure the compensation schemes should provide a possibility of aligning the goals of the institutions with the employees' personal goals. And the incentives, as much as possible, should reward both quantity and quality, so i.e. the number of borrowers against repayment rates. And then it should also have other incentive structures in place, like increased vacation time, external training programs, pensions, and employee loans. Typically, MFIs are in the business of managing risk. Risk because the business of intermediation, which is taking money from surplus units and giving to deficit units, comes with this the potential default risk or credit risk of persons not paying up when it is due for payment. And there are other risks associated with the normal code of doing business, i.e. operational risk and other environmental issues or risks that may come in. So risk management typically seeks to ensure that as much as possible, there's a need to reduce the exposure and the potential negative implications that may arise. Now, risk management is also important because of the commercialization of microfinance, meaning that it also expands the net and brings in more risk. The recent reputation challenges that MFIs especially have faced in relation to the poor and their systems, and then the rapid diversification of service providers and delivery channels. Now, in general, you can see risk as a possibility that current and future events may have an adverse impact on the objectives, capital, or earnings of the MFIs. So, in terms of risk management, the idea is to have a systematic process where we are able to identify the risk, we assess it and look at its implications, and then we manage it and also control the issues at hand. So that's the essence of risk management. Identify, assess and quantify, manage and control. Risk management usually includes balancing risk-taking against a well-designed control environment. Now, to a large extent, the risks that are faced by financial service providers will encompass credit risk, which is a risk of default from clients, liquidity risk, not having enough funds to make good on relevant payments in the short term, market risk, that are risks emanating from changes within the market landscape, operational risk that has to do with systems like within the operational paradigm, so fraud, systems, transaction error risk. There are also compliance and legal risks that are emanating from complying with the relevant regulations, the reputational risk, and then we also have political and macroeconomic risks. When it comes to operational risk, normally the provider faces these risks in their daily operations. So even as the employees and others may be dealing with funds moving in and out, there's a possibility of fraud and theft. There could be system failures or system errors or human errors that expose the MFI. So you could have cash theft by loan officers or other staff, and that's one of the most common incidences of fraud. Others may include manipulating systems, data input, and recording borrowers or loans that do not exist. So honest, well-qualified, and competent, as well as motivated staff constitute one of the best ways to manage and control operational risk. Another way to handle the risk is to look at the internal control framework within the MFI. Now, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, that's the COSO, has a framework that defines internal control as a process that's affected by the entity's board of directors, management, and other personnel, which is designed to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of objectives in the following categories. So the process, it ensures that there's effectiveness and efficiency of operations, reliability of financial reporting, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So an internal control system normally would consist of 5 interrelated components. First is the control environment, which is the overall attitude, awareness, actions of the board and managers. Then there's a risk assessment, which helps to identify, measure, and prioritize the risk at hand. Then there are control activities which providers can choose either to avoid the risk, transfer the risk, or control the risk. And then there's monitoring, internal control, a process whereby the board and senior management will monitor the systems to ensure that everything is functioning appropriately. And then there's information and communications, where staff and management must be aware of policies and procedures. So, without a right internal control framework, a significant number of the risks are likely to get in the way and negatively impact the MFI in question. Now, let's look at the activities that fall under control. So, we refer to these as the control activities. We can have segregation of duties. Then we can also have dual controls. Now, when we have segregation of duties, in the case of, let's say, an entity, one of the staff members takes the money from the customer, another one, and another one, maybe the one who will cross-check after recording has been done to ensure that whatever was collected was also inputted. So they are separation. Or you may ensure that in the event of collection and pay in, someone else collects the money, depending on the external agent who may go out and do the legwork, and the one who does the entry. So the segregation of duties, especially where there's a risk that having the same person do both functions could bring in the possibility of risk or anything like a fraud. Now, you also provide dual controls, where you have a number of people cross-checking a particular thing so that you have consensus. Then you can also have human resource controls. In some other cases, there are signature requirements and approval authorization, so that there are levels where certain people cannot exceed in terms of certain payments, etc. Now, accounting, administrative, reporting, and financial policies and procedures, that's the employees and staff are expected to follow regarding activities to be undertaken. Then there are also budgets and comparative reports that are undertaken to ensure that all is well. There are also limits on cash or expenditures. In certain cases, certain levels of expenditure must rise to the board. Then there's also the need to design and use adequate documents and records. So record keeping is key. Also, there's a need to keep physical control of assets, and then the accounting controls and IT general control. So a number of control activities that the MFI undertake to ensure that they keep risk well within their control or their purview. Now, internal audit is another way of managing risk, in a sense that it audits the internal framework to ensure that all is well. So the IIA defines internal auditing as independent objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operation. The internal auditor is independent of other business processes and reports to the board, usually through the board committee. Small or informal providers may not have a dedicated audit function, but can be outsourced. So internal audit actually is more of an audit function that is internal to the organization that seeks to ensure that as much as possible, there are systems in place to provide assurance of the fulfillment of the organization's objectives. And like I rightly said, small and informal providers may find it difficult, financially constrained, to have a dedicated audit function, but these they can outsource. Now, the internal audit department typically will conduct a financial audit where they assess the accounting system or the financial reports to ensure that all is where it should be. They also have compliance audits, which is to ensure that compliance with relevant laws, regulations, policies, and procedures are kept to the letter. They also have operational audits, which assess the adequacy of operational methods and resources. And then they also have management audits, which assess the quality of the approach of managers to risk and control. Then there's also the case of reviews, where they evaluate the means of safeguarding the assets. And then there are evaluations of internal control systems to assess the deterrence and detection of fraud. There are also periodic audits of computer systems and post-installation evaluations. And then there are special reviews that are conducted at the request of the CEO or the board. So to a large extent, the audit functions just seeks to ensure that systems that may be put in place to ensure that the organization is on track to fulfilling its objectives and mandate are functional and deliver in terms of value. So having looked critically at that, it would be important to know the role of boards of directors, because to a large extent it is the board that determines the viability and sustainability in the long run of any business. So the role of the board should be quite clear, and in that case it also goes a step further to determine whether at any point in time, given the role of the board, there may be a need to understand the elements that determine whether a board is effective or not. And knowing whether a board is effective or not flows from a board assessment or a board evaluation. And in the event that gaps are found, these can be taken up by providing relevant training and coaching services. At the end of this lesson as well, you should be able to discuss, or in terms of review, how to design an optimal incentive scheme for MFI. So this balances the issue of having the right number of borrowers and clients versus the appropriate repayment frame. So there's no need to have large numbers of clients, but also then have problems with the repayment of facilities. You should also be in a position to discuss the various risks faced by MFIs. Explain the best ways to manage and control operational risk within the MFI, and then discuss the role of audits in risk management. So that brings us to the end of our session on governance and management of MFIs. See you in the next lesson.